Hello everybody and welcome along to the second in our series of presentations discussing our course improvement plan here at Pannal Golf Club. Now the second in our series is very much focused on our tree management plan and phase one of our tree management plan. Now this is the tree management plan that we've been putting together in conjunction with our expert John Nicholson, our woodland expert. And the title at the bottom very much sums up about what we're trying to do here, and that is decreasing our population but increasing our quality. So while we're looking to have a net loss in trees out there, what we're really trying to do is highlight some of the grand specimen trees we have out there, as well as reinstating some of the traditional elements of our golf club here at Pannal, and undoubtedly improving the turf agronomics along the way. If we look then at trees firstly from a science background, we know how wonderful they are at fixing carbon and how wonderful they are at fighting greenhouse emissions also. It goes without saying that from a scientific point of view, trees have a phenomenal effect on our landscape. It also goes without saying that throughout the world we have some beautiful specimen trees. These often reside in gardens or in sports fields. A couple of them there are shown. From the magnolias in the top left hand corner that grace the White House, from the apple tree at Woolsthorpe Manor that Isaac Newton made famous from his law of gravitation, the Eisenhower tree pictured there at Augusta National. President Eisenhower in the early 50s used to often get stuck behind that tree, and he was adamant that he wanted it taken out, and the chairman would never accept that request, and that became known as the Eisenhower tree. And even in cricket we look there at the St Lawrence line that was famous at Canterbury Cricket Club, and that was a replacement there for the St Lawrence line, which sadly had to be taken down a few years ago. And the cricket ground was actually built around the tree, and the tree always resided within the boundary ropes. So some beautiful specimen trees out there, and we are fortunate enough to have some beautiful specimen trees in our golf course, and we also have some future great specimen trees also. Whilst we have some beautiful specimen trees in the sport and around the globe, their place within our golfing environment has always been hotly debated. Particularly when we look at an architecture point of view and the strategy of the game, the vast majority of golf course architects seem to be in agreement over the years that their place within our sport is limited. If we look at the bottom quote there, that was a quote that we used in the last presentation, a quote by Mr. Harry Cole about trees being a fluky and obnoxious hazard. Now, as we said in the last presentation, he felt that way because he felt that they took away the strategic element of our game. Everybody who was stuck behind a tree had to do the same thing, whereas things like bunkers created a strategic level, a heroic escape option. The top quote by Donald Ross is very much along the same line, but explains it a little bit differently, in that he felt that everybody deserved to have a fair playing condition, and that trees in the wrong place offered an unfair hazard and therefore shouldn't be allowed to stand. The previous slide represented golf course architects of the age. The firm at the bottom of Mackenzie and Ebert are a more modern golf course architect, more famed for their work recently at Turnberry. Now they came to the golf club back in 2008 and wrote a report around the golf club. And in that report they talked about the tree and scrub growth had really changed the nature of the golf course at Pannal, and that a once open and character type course had now become more tree lined. They argued then that had gone too far. In the 10 years since that report, has that situation got any better? Well, certainly not. In that time, those trees that were there have got bigger, those gaps have got narrower, and that scrub has encroached more. And in that time, there's been more planting as well. At this juncture then, it will be worth recapping from the last presentation how the trees here at Pannal are impacting the agronomics and the design of our golf course. In the first presentation, we highlighted 4 areas where the golf course here at Pannal was being impacted agronomically and design-wise by the tree encroach. It would be worth revisiting and talking about those again. The first of these is always the most paramount, and that is turf quality. Our game is a game played on turf grass, therefore the essence of our game requires good turf grass. So we have to create the proper agronomic conditions for this. Unfortunately, the pictures shown there are all represented here at Pannal. That is moss encroach at the top left, outbreaks of fusarium patch, Microdochium nival. At the bottom left, outbreaks of anthracnose. That picture was taken at the back of the first green about 3 weeks ago. Top right we have enrichment, and bottom right we have the ingress of annual meadowgrass poor annuate. The top right picture of an enrichment is an interesting video that is available to watch on our Pannal Greens team page, and if you're not a member of those, it would be worth following those now. So that's Pannal Greens team on either Facebook or Twitter, and in there we talk a little bit about the organic matter drop from trees and how that enriches the long grasses round about, making them coarse and very, very difficult to play out of and find balls in. In that we compare and contrast with a site that has no organic enrichment, and we can see how much better that is. The second way that the trees affect the agronomics here at Pannal is through our drainage. We know that some of our tree species out there are very aggressive rooters and root within our drainage systems. And the picture on the right there was a tree root that was taken out over the winter months, and that was buried within a clay tile. You can see how the rooting there has migrated up the clay tile, in essence blocking the whole drain and making the drain redundant. Unfortunately, these trees, although they're great at uptaking water during the summer when we don't want them to, in the winter they go very much like the grass plant, and that is they go dormant, so their water requirement is very, very minimal. Hence the reason why on places on the golf course during the winter we quite actively see puddles around trees. At that time they're just not taking up the water. So that's one way that our problems are affected, and that is through drainage. The second way our turf grass here is affected at Pannal by trees is that of the tree rooting, and particularly tree rooting within drain lines. The picture on the right there is a tree root that was taken out this winter on the golf course, and that was taken out of a clay drain, and that had completely blocked the clay drain, making it absolutely useless and redundant. So some of the tree species here on our golf course are very, very aggressive at finding water, but only at certain times of the year, and that is the priority. So when we want them to take up water, i.e. during the winter, they are very much like the grass plant in the sense that they go dormant, their water requirement is minimal, and therefore that's why we often see puddles around trees, because they're just not taking it up at that time of year. Unfortunately though, these have a massive impact on our drains, and how many of these trees run alongside drain lines and are currently impeding drainage here at Pannal. Whilst trees are pretty poor at uptaking water during the winter, similar to the grass plant, their need for the water in the summer is extreme. And never has that been more in evidence in the past couple of months when we've been experiencing these drought conditions here in the United Kingdom. The trees' need for water is huge, and the place that competes with that is the turf grass plant. And you can see in the picture on the right there, those feeder roots from that tree working through the soil's profile, and they're sucking out all the moisture, making it very, very difficult for the turf grass plant to survive. The picture on the left is a birch tree at the right of the second hole, and you can see that a scorch mark round about where the plant the tree is uptaking water and taking it away from the plant. And there's a great video on this on our YouTube channel, which is Pannal Golf Club, where we've done a video on moisture competition, and we've used a moisture meter there to show this as a scientific representation about the amount of water that tree is taking up. So the tree's requirement for water and nutrient really exceeds the plants at this time of year, and unfortunately the plant suffers as a detriment of that. The fourth and final way that the golf course suffers as a result of trees is that of the architecture of the golf course. So the trees impede lines and they change the nature of the golf course and the golf hole. The picture shown there is a picture that we used in the prior presentation, and it greatly demonstrates how golf course architecture can be affected but can be remedied to improve the hole without losing the general look and aesthetic. The picture at the top, obviously, the canvas is very squeezed with trees. The two bunkers down the right are becoming redundant or becoming a double hazard. If you go in those, you're pitching out sideways because of trees, similar to the bunkers down the left, so that sense of heroic escape has been lost as the trees squeeze the canvas. You can also see that the amount of shade that these trees can create, the density in there is quite extreme. The picture at the bottom shows how that's been remedied. So the tree lines have been pushed out, they've been thinned out, which has allowed for the bunkers to be remodelled and come back into play. What we're also seeing is we're seeing more light and airflow getting in there as the tree canopies have been pushed back well out of the way of lines of play. So we're avoiding more damage, we're avoiding players having to play out from trees because the canvas there is very wide. What we also see is in the bottom right corner is the introduction of wild grasslands. So wild grasslands can take the place of where trees have gone, offering a little bit more biodiversity to our environment. So although the general aesthetic looks the same, the agronomics and the strategy of the whole are far better in picture 2. A few slides ago at the start of the presentation, you'll remember we showed some great isolated specimen trees. Now they were in gardens around the world, they were in sporting environments. The beauty of them is undeniable. We also talked about that whilst we wanted a distinct net loss of trees on our golf course, what we wanted is an increase in quality. And we know we've got some grand specimen trees here at Pannal, and unfortunately a lot of them are hidden. We also know that trees form an important part of heathland ecosystems as well as parkland ecosystems, and therefore the importance of retaining and keeping some of these and highlighting some of these is absolutely paramount. What we're looking for is the term at the bottom, isolated majesty. So creating a vista where these trees can shine and an environment where they can flourish. Now, having recapped some of the principles that we talked about in the first presentation of why tree management work is necessary, what we wanted to show you is some on-site imagery and some of those problems and evidence on a couple of holes here at Pannal. And this could be replicated on any hole at Pannal. This is quite easy to do, and what we've been doing is using our drone to get some drone images. And in the following slides we've just pictured some of those, we've drawn over the top of them, and hopefully I can talk you through some of those problems and evidence. So this is our first hole here at Pannal, and as I said before, this is an image taken from our drone, and you can see the first hole there and the second hole ahead of you. Now the annotation there, the two circles to the bottom of the picture show how the fairway is being squeezed. So if we look at that red line there in the middle of the fairway, how narrow that has become. And those trees just keep gradually pushing further and further out, narrowing and narrowing the gap. The black arrow shows more likely where the fairway used to have been routed, so that fairway would have been a lot further right by the line of the bunkers, and we also know that there's a grass bunker there further up on the right that would have been more likely in play. So what's happened is the trees have squeezed in, we've planted more and more, we've squeezed the gap, In essence, we've made quite a tough hole anyway, that little bit harder again. We also see from the white arrows at the back how the green is surrounded on 3 sides by trees there. And those are creating a shady environment, they're creating moisture retention, they're creating a real good environment for active disease. The 2 small circles at the top left of the picture show the view from the second tee, and again the trees are squeezing in there, making that drive very, very narrow. The trees on the right are also making the bunkers on the right very invisible, and at some stage they're going to become redundant as well. So gradually over the years these trees are just squeezing in, they're affecting the architecture, and certainly on the first green hugely they're affecting the agronomics. The top left of the picture there, the black arrow, those are pointing at the poplar, which are halfway up the left hand side of the second hole. Now these are the ultimate drain blockers. These things root and drains, they're very, very aggressive at taking water from drains, and we know we've had problems in the past with these. They also have a very, very short lifespan, and poplar tend to disease from the inside out, so it's very, very difficult to ascertain the health of these trees. But again, one's for immediate removal. So going up to the green, this is a drone image from above the first green there. You can just see green's more in the front left corner, mowing the green. So this is early morning, you can see the amount of shade there being cast across the green. So that's covering 2/3 if not 3/4 of the green is sitting in shade there, while a lot around about it is sitting in bright sunlight. And what that is creating in there is a microclimate, so there's very little air movement in there, surfaces are staying that little bit moist, that little bit damper. So a real good environment for active disease. So very, very dense, very, very packed. We've also got 2 trees down the right there, very, very close to the green surface. Feed their roots well with under the green surface, extracting nutrient from the green and taking it away from the grass plant. At the back we know that's where we've got a high prevalence of moss. We get a high prevalence of anthracnose, certainly back left. And again, just a great environment for disease. If we look across there towards the ladies' tee at the second, you can see how the trees are starting to squeeze the gap in the driving area, and how in a couple of years those bunkers down the right will no longer be visible. So this is an example, a prime example of great areas where disease is prevalent, annual meadowgrass is prevalent, really difficult culture there to grow good turf grass. Moving on from the first to another image, this is an image of the 7th, again taken from the drone. So we've got the 7th there playing down, the 10th green in the far distance, 12th on the right, and then we've got 8th running the other way. And you can quite see from these images how dense these pine copses are in places. That one there between 8 and 9, very, very dense in there. What is also noticeable about these, about the straight edges of these tree copses. So when we talk about linear edges of trees, what we're trying to do when we plant trees and when we try to manage trees is create an offset edge so that everything looks very, very natural. These look planted, you can tell straight away these have been planted. They don't look right at all. Very, very dense in there again, a lot of heliotropic trees growing on one side, because they're just all fighting and competing for light and air. If we look there, we've dotted the edge of the 7th green there, and the red bit, so the back half and the right hand side, all massively affected by the trees down the right there. All of those trees are rooting under the green, again sapping water and nutrient from the green, and we know that there's a massively high prevalence of moss here, certainly in the back right corner, and this is what's causing this. If we look though halfway down the 7th fairway there, this is one of the best drone images we've taken thus far, and that is because there's a tree down there that actually shines blue from the sky. I mean, this tree is stunning, and that is one of our copper beeches, and unfortunately it gets lost in a lot of scrubland, it gets lost in a lot of the rubbish around about it, and that's what we talk about isolated majesty. If we give that tree space, it flourishes, it becomes a real feature of the golf hole. And the white arrow actually shows that because it's a feature from the 7th, why couldn't it be a feature from the 15th as well? Because at the minute from the 15th, all we see at the back of that green is scrubland. Why not make this into a tree which can be seen from everywhere? So the final drawn image here, and you can just see in the top left hand corner bathed in sunlight is the 6th green. Middle arrow depicts the 8th hole there running up, and the far right is the 9th hole running the other way, so looking back towards the tees there. And what's noticeable straight away when you look at this is the amount of shade. Look at the lines of trees and the amount of shade they're casting over each and every hole. Now we know that around the 7th tee, 8th hole and 9th tee are our wettest areas of the golf course. And look at the shade that we have there. Now this is shade, and this is in the middle of summer. This only gets worse in the winter, and some of these holes barely see any sunlight at all. We can see that the 8th green is in shade. We know high predominance of annual meadowgrass, high predominance of disease, struggles that little bit more than all the rest to get going in the spring. And why? Because it's not getting the same light as everything else. It's not getting the same availability to photosynthesize early on in the day. Again, we see the straight lines to the tree plantations. Very, very straight, very, very linear. No breaks in them at all. Looks man-made, looks planted, doesn't look good. If we look to the far side, to the 9th tee, so the green triangle, the green rectangle, that depicts the 9th winter tee, and we know that's not in play anymore because quite simply those trees down the left have all encroached, so we've lost a teeing area there. So the shot shape generally is a fade for most people. 70% of people generally hit a fade. If you start a fade there, you are going to hit the tree, and that's just an example of how the trees encroach over the years. The red lines through the middle of the 8th there show how those trees start to squeeze the fairway. The hole gets narrower and narrower, and because of the shade lines, ultimately gets wetter and wetter. So those were just some of the examples here at Pannal, but as I said earlier, we could use any hole at the golf club and show examples of where things are going wrong, particularly in relation to our tree management. Therefore, action has to happen. We need to take action. We need to reverse this trend and start building a golf course that is fit for the future and replicates something that we had in the past. So to do that, we have to put a team together. We have to put a team of professionals together. We have to seek the right advice, and we have to learn the lessons from other golf clubs round about us who've done similar work, so that we can do something a little bit better with a little less problems. So those slides perfectly illustrate some of the problems here at Pannal, and as I said before, we could use any one of a number of images from the golf club or any hole from the golf club and easily show of where the tree management is going wrong or has gone wrong over the years. What's important now though is to put those things right, is to reverse that trend and to start to build a golf course that is better agronomically, that doesn't have this tree ceiling phase over it that we currently have, and that performs well in the future. We also want to build something that replicates something like the traditional Pannal of old. To do that though, we need a team of professionals, so it's about putting together a good team, a team that know what they're talking about, that have experience in this and can give us the proper advice so that we can make the proper decisions. We also need to learn the lessons from those round about us. We know that tree management programs have been ongoing around about us in this area and throughout the UK. So we need to talk to those people. We need to see what we can learn and how we can do things a little bit better with a few less hiccups. So first things first, putting together that team. Who is in that team? Who is going to be doing these works? Well, we've enlisted the help of John Nicholson. John Nicholson is a tree management consultant. 99% of John's work now is within the golf industry, and he's done tree management plans all over the United Kingdom and bits in Europe as well. And he's helped golf clubs to get trees in the right place and make sure that they don't affect the playability and agronomics of the golf course. So he's done that locally and he's done that throughout the UK. Very experienced man and tree management consultant, and John's on board and he's helping us through this plan. We've also got Ross McNeil, who's the forestry felling contractor. So when the big felling starts happening, Ross and his team will be the people doing it. Ross, again, ample golf course experience. This is why we've chased to get him so hard, because he has golf course experience, although from a forestry background, so he understands the principles of moving around a golf course and about working around the golf that we have. We've put in place James Hutchinson, who's our ecology manager for the British International Golf Greenkeepers Association. James has been involved in ecology for a lot of years now, and he's helping us to understand better how, when we take trees out, how we can increase the biodiversity of our site by doing other things, wild grasslands, by regenerating our heather, by doing wildflower meadows, and James is the guy that's going to help us do that. He's helping us to see that a canvas that has less trees is not lacking in biodiversity. If anything, we have the potential to raise our biodiversity. We've also got Ken Moody there as well, who's our golf course architect. So obviously a lot of this phase one is about creating the canvas, and it's people like Ken Moody who will come and draw out the canvas when it is created, who will then put in the architecture, put in the strategy back into the golf course, the strategy that would have been there years ago, but unfortunately because of the tree encroach has been lost over the years. Ken, very experienced architect, he's on board and has already visited the site and has already given us some great insights into how doing the tree management plan will create us with a more strategic golf course. Another hugely important part of the planning phase, if not the most important part, is to do site visits. So it's to visit people in the locality who've done large tree management programs and see if there's any lessons that we can learn. Look at the bits that we like, look at the bits that don't suit our eye, and see what we can learn from that so that we can do the best work that we can do here at Pannal. And two of those golf clubs were Moortown and Headingley, and myself and a couple of others from committee had the privilege to go down there and chat at length with the secretaries and golf course managers of those places to talk about how they went through the project phase, what went well for them, what didn't go well for them, and what we can learn for the future. We talked a lot about the remedial works, how long that takes, what that looks like. We talked about how these interacted with their membership, how we want more interaction with our membership. We want to give them the details that they need so that they feel empowered. We also talked about health and safety concerns. How do we get golf around the golf course without affecting the health and safety of our members, but still keeping up so that our golfing schedule isn't interrupted? And we also discussed the contractor options available, who these people had used and why they felt they were a good choice to use. One of the sites we visited, obviously mentioned there, was Headingley Golf Club, and we got to spend some time there with Andy, the course manager, and he was very open and talked to us a lot about the process and some of the things that we're going to encounter on the process. And he obviously took us around the golf course to show us a couple of areas, and he sent us in some befores and afters, and these are good ways of kind of picturing certainly some of the pine copse areas on our golf course and some of the management required. So this is a before here at Headingley, and you can see here some of the problems again, very similar to the problems we have at Pannal. The golf course is being squeezed. Look at those areas where the fairways are getting very narrow. Look at the bunkers down the right. Bunkers down the right are now null and void. It is a double hazard. If you go in those, there's a likelihood that you're going to have to pitch out sideways. Look at the density of the trees in all the areas. So what you cannot see there is there's trees on the back right corner as well. So trees surrounding the entirety of the green, creating a microclimate, high disease, high moss and grass. We've got a lot of gorse in front of the tee, so if you hit one poorly off the tee, it's a lost ball without a shadow of a doubt. So again, very squeezed canvas there. So this picture was taken when we visited Henley last month. So the slide before showed a hole that had no management practice to it, and that hole is on the left of the screen here, and you can see what it looks like now after management has taken place. So this is a picture of two holes running side by side. Both have had significant tree management take place. If you notice there, what they've done is they've reduced the density of all the pine copses. They've actually put them into pine stands, so separated them out to give a better aesthetic. They've then scalloped the edges so that you don't get all these linear straight edges, so they look a little bit more natural in appearance and not as planted. You can see on the picture on the left, which is the one we showed before, the bunkers down the right are now back in place. The strategy of the hole has been reinstated. That double hazard has been taken away. The turf areas now don't look as squeezed, so they've been widened out as well, giving our turf more space and more light. To the back right of the green, those trees have been moved along the bank side, and the trees at the back have been pushed further back. So again, giving the turf and the green site more space, more air and more light, therefore reducing annual meadowgrass, reducing poa, reducing moss and reducing disease incidence. What we also notice is a lot of the tall grass areas are beginning to flourish again. So where bent fescue was present in the past, that is returning, and it is returning en masse, and they're having great effect with that. So it's very much a case of build it and it will come. So they've put the culture there, and the culture is now creating an environment which is suitable for fine grass development and tall grass areas. So if you can see from this, the aesthetic is still very similar. It just looks like we've got more space. The strategy of the hole has been maintained, but it's not a canvas bereft of trees. There's plenty of trees still there, although plenty have already been removed, and I can see that the aesthetic is far better than it was in slide 1. So the start of this presentation was a recap of why we do what we do. The second part was a look at where it's going wrong here at Pannal, some of the holes where it's going wrong, where the lack of tree management is seriously affecting the agronomics and the strategy of the game. We then looked at some people in our locality, and we visited the sites. We've kind of shown you there some of the work that they've done and how that's improved the agronomics, but the general aesthetic is still the same. Now for us, this next phase that we're going to talk about is putting the meat on the bone. So it's talking about what's going to be happening in the next couple of months and what we're going to be doing. So I think it would be safe to say that ever since the first presentation at the start of the years, we've had a lot of dialogue about trees. I seem to talk about trees a lot, and I'm getting a little bit sick of talking about them, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. But obviously a lot of that talk and speculation is fear of the unknown, and I think there's this misguided conception as well that we're going to turn this into a links course completely bereft of trees, and I can assure you that's far from the case. The whole idea of this is to highlight some of those great specimens we have out there, while still maintaining some of that open character that the golf course was laid out in. And even with significant thinning around this golf course, there's that many trees out there, there is still going to be plenty there left. But some of the questions that people are going to be asking, and you're going to be asking yourselves, is, how large is this project? How many trees are you going to be taking? What sort of length of time is it going to take? Is it going to cause disruption to my golf? When's the first phase going to start? Are there any species that you're going to be targeting specifically for removal? So some of those questions you're going to be asking, you're going to have been asking for the last few weeks, and I'm going to try and answer those questions for you now. So this is an image taken from Google Maps. It's a satellite image from Google Maps, and it's a satellite image of our site. And you can see there the entirety of the site, with the clubhouse just middle left of the screen and the golf course laid out from that point. What you'll firstly notice is that we've split the golf course into two sections there, and phase 1 is the section that has the white border around it. Now that section comprises holes number 1 to 9, and I'll just explain that through that section. So what we have there is we have areas that are sectioned off as yellow, blue and red. The blue areas, they indicate areas of contractor felling, so they're areas where we have quite large trees in there. The areas of thinning are quite extensive, and therefore to make them quick and efficient and to get the wood off site, that is an area where we need to use contractor intervention. The areas highlighted in yellow, they're more in-house areas. Those are areas that will be left till later on in the year, possibly going into the winter, and those are areas that once the contractor site is cleared off, we'll go back into and we'll do the management in those areas in-house. The areas designated in red, those are areas that have received significant management already, areas between 3 and 6 and 9 and 10 at the bottom right of the screen there. What's interesting to note about these areas is the blue areas, those do not mean, and I repeat, do not mean clear fell areas. All of this is simply thinning, so there are no clear fell areas in there, and what we're doing is we're trying to reduce the tree stock, open up light areas, particularly in holes 7, 8 and 9 where we talked about those linear lines of pines earlier on. So open up areas of light, get more corridors of light in there, and try and improve the culture and the aesthetics within those areas. So these are areas of thinning. So these areas comprise, we calculate, about 58,000 square meters, so just under 6 hectares of woodland management there. That's not 6 hectares of wood removal, that's 6 hectares of woodland management, so thinning in all of these areas. So as I say, blue areas contractor felling, yellow areas in-house, and the in-house areas we'll get to after the contractor felling stage is finished, and that's what comprises phase 1, holes 1 to 9. So there really is just a summary of what we talked about on that map. So the area of woodland being managed in phase 1, just under 6 hectares in total, which takes in holes number 1 to 9. Volume of trees to be removed in that area is between 50 to 60%, so quite a significant thin, but given the amount of trees we have out there, the general aesthetic will remain the same, but what we will see is an improvement in culture, an improvement in light, an improvement in airflow, and we'll also see some of those linear edges taken out, specifically up in the areas between 7, 8 and 9. Predominant species for removal, well, difficult to say, but predominantly all the birch will go, larch will go, some pine and a lot of the ornamentals will go as well. However, I think a note of caution here. As we stated earlier in the presentation, the agronomic potential of the turf always comes first. So whether that's green sites, tea sites, if they are being affected or by the trees around about them, no matter what species, then there is a risk of those trees being removed to improve the agronomics. The agronomic potential and the turf come first, and it's about balancing that right so that we get that right first. So anything that affects the agronomic potential of the turf could be considered for removal, but certainly birch, larch, ornamentals are going to take a precedent in that. The other thing that we're going to be removing is obviously the 3Ds, and I'll just explain that now. So here are the 3Ds. So on the left we've got dead, in the middle we've got diseased, and on the right we've got deformed. Now every single one of these we have on the golf course at the minute. We have a few dead out there, we've certainly got a few diseased out there, and the one we have the most of is deformed. And by deformed, you can see there from the tree on the right how we've got the growth on one side, which we call that heliotropic growth, where it's grown up through the canopy, it's stretched in the only direction it can to get sunlight. Trees are too close together, too tightly packed, and as you can see it grows that deformed way. And we certainly see a lot of these heliotropic trees within our pine stands between 7, 8 and 9. So those are the areas that we're looking to get rid of, and certainly the trees that will be destined for removal as well. So I certainly think key question here, when's phase 1 going to start? How long is it likely to take? Well, phase 1 starts on the beginning of September. Monday the 3rd of September is when we start that phase, and that phase is likely to take 6 weeks, no longer than 6 weeks, and that will include the commercial felling and the large scale wood removal. Monday the 3rd of September for that, no longer than 6 weeks. So I think the question arises at this point, why September, why the start of September, why not later, why not November, why not a winter programme work? And I think this map explains it better. So this is a Google image again, so another satellite image of the site, clubhouse middle left again, very much the same layout as we showed before. What we've done here is we've highlighted a couple of areas, and they're just a couple of areas in the front line where the soil profiles are very, very wet. Now obviously we're doing quite well at the minute because we're in drought conditions, so everywhere is quite firm, and it's good to make use of that. But we know when these areas get wet, they get very, very wet. Certainly the areas between 7, 8, 9, as we talked about previously, 9th tee, the wettest areas on the golf course. The type of machinery we're going to be using, contractor felling wise, quite heavy, quite large scale. In areas if we have to use boarding we will, but we prefer not to have to use that, and we prefer to get this done while the soil profiles are still reasonably dry. So I really think it's worthwhile starting that as early as we can and getting those larger bits out quick, and that leaves us with a better scope for recovery during the winter period. Also doing it that early, we're going to see some of the deciduous leaves of trees are certainly still in leaf, so what we'll see there is we'll see a pretty instant impact minus the stumps removed. So we'll get an instant impact and you'll be able to see what that looks like straight away. But worth doing, certainly from a weather point of view. We wouldn't want to risk damage to the golf course unnecessarily by tracking heavy scale machinery across the course in periods of wet weather. So worth starting at the start of September and at least getting these areas like left of second, those areas between 7, 8 and 9, getting those out first, and getting ahead of the weather before it changes. So I think the next thing to touch on, with a September start date working through September to the start of October, what is the potential disruption that is going to cause to the golf club on a day-to-day basis and to golf? Well, it goes without saying that on large contractor fell sites there is going to be some level of disruption, but our aim is to obviously keep that to a minimal level. So no works will be carried out over the weekends, so if you're golfing on the weekend you should largely see no disruption. And competitions will be worked around where possible. Golf days will be worked around where possible. So if that means moving from one site on the golf course to another, starting earlier, working later, then that's what we'll do to accommodate golf. Some noise is going to be present. We're using agricultural machinery, there's felling going on, so you are going to hear noise on the golf course, but again, that will be kept to the minimal level it can be. One of the main reasons we talked about Ross McNeil at the start and his felling gang and how hard we chase to get those contractors in is because they've done the amount of golf course work they've done over the years. So these guys are well versed in working on golf courses, and obviously we'll brief them on a day-to-day basis on what we want doing and what we've got on, so they'll be well versed in that. And again, that was one of the reasons for chasing them. They know the golf course sector, they've worked in it extensively, and that's why we wanted them here at Pannal. When it comes to health and safety, again, one of the reasons for choosing that contractor was because they've worked on golf course sites before, so their safety is a prime concern to you and to everybody else that comes onto the site. But prior to this starting, there will be some safety guidance given out by myself and by the club so that we can keep you safe out on the golf course while you're out there, so that there's no incidences happen and that we can get everybody around golfing with minimal disruption to the game. So following the tree removals, that period of 6 weeks of felling and tree removal, We then move into brash collection, so whatever brash is left will be collected during that period, and then we move on to the big one, which is the stump grinding process. So obviously the volume of trees coming out, that's going to take a little while. We expect that to take around 4 weeks using a pedestrian type large stump grinder, and any areas that require mulching after that will be done separately. So if we need to bring a mulcher in after that, then we will do, but the grinding will take priority and the grinding will come first. And again, as I say, we're expecting that to take 4 weeks. The main issue with the stump grinding is obviously the amount of bark chipping that is left, and that bark chipping is quite toxic to the grass plant, so all of that has to be then removed, and all of these holes will then have to be soiled and seeded or turfed. So that's quite a lengthy process. That's the bit that takes the time, is this level of reinstatement, and that's the bit we're keen to get right, because how we reinstate it really dictates how it looks in the future. So stump grinding a big one for us, and that'll, as I say, commence following the tree removal, following the brash collection, and we're expecting that to take up to 4 weeks, and the holes to get filled as we go, and possibly take a couple of weeks after that to get all of those done. So after all of that, so once we've taken out the trees, we've removed the stumps, we've filled the holes, we've seeded, what then are the issues? Are there any issues? Well, yes, there are. The regeneration issues, and we kind of saw a lot of these regeneration issues on our visit to Moortown, and we've seen areas of regeneration issues here at the golf club. So what we have here is, when we have an extensive tree canopy, the trees suppress everything underneath, so they take out all the water, they take out all the nutrient, and they cause a lot of shade. So everything under the tree canopy is suppressed. So we either have bare areas or we have very thin areas. So everything there is suppressed by the tree. Tree out is out competing everything else. But what ultimately we have under there is a large organic matter level and a large seed bank. So we have all sorts in there. We have self-seeding trees that are sitting there, we have self-seeding grasses that are sitting there, we have a lot of weed that's sitting there, we have the potential for bracken that is sitting there. So that is all sitting in that seed bank below the canopy being suppressed. When we remove these trees and we give that area light, we give it water, we give it air, there is regeneration issues. These things start springing up and they start firing, and that is quite an evidence at Moortown, and we got a great demonstration of how they're managing that at the minute, and we've certainly seen it on this site as well. The one that comes to mind I'll show in a second is left of the third, between 3 and 6, where we've done a clear fell. So we've got to look at this as the long-term goals. So do we go back into those areas, and as the bottom picture shows, do we strip off all the organic matter and restart all again, which is quite a lengthy process, or do we manage these by spraying them every year? And this is quite a long-term process, so these will require spraying every year for the next few years because that seed bank is so extensive. But what we've got to view is the long-term goals of this. So we're trying to get grass through there. We will get grass through there initially, but it's about maintaining and managing, the amount of weed and certainly self-seeding tree and grass that is already in there. And what you'll notice is progressive improvement over the years. So what we talked about in the first presentation is that nature doesn't always manage itself in a great way, and certainly not from a golfing environment point of view. That is, we want the turf to perform in certain ways, and to do that we have to manage nature in the way that we want it to work. And that is in evidence here in this picture. So this is a picture looking down towards the third green. And this was an area where we did a video that's on Facebook and Twitter that is well worth a watch if you haven't watched it already, and that was about grassland management and organic matter drop. But here what we're looking at is the bit in front of the camera is our best bit of fineland grass on the golf course. Very low organic matter, low shading, not anything in the area to really harm it, and we get a lovely fine grass plant there, tall, fine, but you can find your ball in there and you can play out of there no problem. What you can see to the left is where we've done a clear fell this year between 3 and 6, and what you've seen in there is all the trees have suppressed the whole seed bank underneath, and look what has happened. That is what we call regeneration issues. So the bracken has sprung up, We've got weed that's sprung up, we've got self-seeding trees that have sprung up. We have got some grassland in there which is further down towards the green side, which is doing alright. But what we need to do is we need to manage the bracken in there, we need to manage the weed in there, and we need to manage the self-seeding trees in there. So these are areas that we'll be looking to spray, and these are areas that we'll be spraying soon. And these are areas that we're going to have to spray for the next few years if we're going to manage these and we're going to get grassland that we see in the foreground in those areas. And there's every reason that we should get grassland there for those areas. What we see is that is the heathland area, and if the grassland in front of the camera is there, there's no reason why we can't get on the left. It is just going to require some intensive maintenance because of those regeneration issues from tree suppression over the years. So as a general look at timescales then, if we just revert back to timescales and what that looks like, then we've got that contractor tree felling and log removal, 3rd of September to around about the 8th of October, so no longer than 6 weeks to get those trees down and get the logs removed off site. We've then got brush clear up, so brush clear up will be happening in amongst that, so the contractors will be doing some brush clear up, but there will still be brush to clear up after that, and that's going to go on until the middle, the back end of October, by the time we get all of that out and all of that away. We then go into our biggest phase, which is probably the stump removal phase, and that's a phase where we'll be doing that in-house, hiring the machine in-house, big, very big pedestrian stump grinder, very productive every day, but we're looking at 4 weeks really to get all of these stumps out and ground. We then move into soil and seeding. So this is our reinstatement phase. So obviously wherever we've ground a stump, we get rid of the wood chip and we have a hole there. That hole needs filling, it needs soil and it needs seeding. That's quite a lot of fill. So that's going to take up until Christmas to get those filled and get those reinstated. Following the Christmas holidays into the new year, that's when the in-house areas will start. So those areas listed in yellow that we highlighted on the map, those are when those areas can start. When we're happy that we've got the area reinstated, that the contractors have done and those stumps are out, then we'll start on the in-house stuff. So following on from completion of phase 1, when the work is done, when the canvas has been created, is that a bereft arbor landscape? Is that bereft of trees? Well, I keep reverting back to this picture that I've used in both presentations now of this work of golf course architecture. And you can see there that the aesthetic is still very, very much the same. The only differences are more space and light, a better strategic design, more biodiversity, and increased playability. All of those are positive aspects. However, the aesthetic still remains very similar. So when the canvas is created, that gives us the ability to then work with our architect. So to work with Ken Moody from Creative Golf Design in creating that strategic element to the golf course, taking away from the penal that we have and putting back in the strategy, putting back in the infrastructure that makes our game a heroic game. When we have that, we will most undoubtedly have a better golfing landscape. So when all is said and done, when the felling's done, when the stump grinding's done, when the reinstatement's done, what do we have? Well, we have a very, very bright future. Literally, we have a brighter future. We have more space, we have increased light. As a result, we have stronger turf. We have a greater agronomic potential to produce surfaces that have finer grasses in them. You see, at the minute, the ceiling point of our golf club is our lack of tree management. Without rectifying that, the golf club has reached its ceiling point. If we remove that ceiling point, the world is our oyster for our golf club. We also have our shining specimen trees. Our copper beech that was hidden would be hidden no more. It would shine as a specimen tree on its own. We have an enhanced strategic golf course. So we moved away from that penal design, and we have the ability to put in infrastructure that is going to better our layout. And most importantly, we have a Pannal that is better aligned with the traditions of its roots, with the traditions of its game, with the tradition of how it was laid out. When we complete this project, we have a brighter future. We have the potential to be far more than we are currently. Do you feel emboldened? Do you feel strong? Do you feel enthusiastic about the project? Are you a little bit excited? If you can answer yes to any of those questions, then we most certainly need you. We know that our cleanup operation is large. We know that our reinstatement operation is huge. Throughout the entirety of the project, there will be ample opportunity for you to offer your assistance as a volunteer. Offering your assistance as a volunteer not only gives you a sense of ownership of the project, but also helps us in meeting our aims that much quicker and being that much more productive. Your help would be greatly appreciated. If you remember from the first presentation, I talked a lot about the minutes of the last 100 years of the history of our golf club. Could it be that 100 years from now, a person in a similar position to myself stands up in front of a group of members and reads the minute? In the autumn of 2018, a group of enthusiastic member volunteers joined forces with the Green staff to create an enhanced agronomic environment that we all benefit from today. It is very rare that opportunities to play significant parts in the future of your golf course come along. This is one such opportunity. If you can help us, then we would be greatly appreciative.